Imagine being wrongfully accused of one of the most horrific crimes, being sentenced to death for something you didn't do, and spending nearly 2 decades in prison, only to have your name cleared but with an unsettling catch. This is the story of the West Memphis Three: Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Misskelley. In 1993, 3 young boys were brutally murdered in West Memphis, Arkansas, and 3 teenagers were convicted. The evidence against them was shaky at best, but what followed was a years-long fight for freedom, filled with legal battles, media attention, and shocking discoveries. Stick around, because this case will leave you questioning everything about the justice system. On May 5, 1993, the small town of West Memphis was rocked by the disappearance of 3 8-year-old boys: Michael Moore, Stephen Branch, and Christopher Byers. The community was shaken, and everyone feared the worst. The next day, the boys' bodies were found in a wooded area known as Robin Hood Hills, tied up, sexually mutilated, and left to die in a way that seemed almost ritualistic. The crime was heinous, and investigators were desperate to find the culprit. But instead of focusing on solid leads or evidence, the police quickly turned their attention to a group of 3 teenagers who were already seen as outcasts: Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Misskelley. Damien, with his dark clothing and interest in the occult, was an easy target for suspicion. The investigation soon took a shocking turn when Jesse Misskelley, a teenager with an IQ of 70, was coerced into a confession. But the details he gave didn't match the crime scene, and his confession was riddled with inconsistencies. Still, the police latched onto it, and the trial began. But was this enough to convict 3 innocent young men? The trial of Damien, Jason, and Jesse became a spectacle. The prosecution relied heavily on Jesse's confession, which he later recanted, claiming it had been coerced. There was no physical evidence linking the boys to the crime scene. No DNA, no fingerprints, nothing. But the town's fear of satanic rituals and the boys' unconventional lifestyle seemed to be enough to convince the jury that they were guilty. Damien was sentenced to death, Jason to life in prison, and Jesse to life without parole. Their fate seemed sealed. But as the years went by, doubts started to surface. Could they really be guilty? Or had a community's prejudices and fear of the unknown led to the wrong verdict? Over the years, the case gained national attention, and new evidence began to emerge. DNA testing, which had been unavailable during the trial, revealed no match between the crime scene and the West Memphis Three. Not a single piece of physical evidence tied them to the murders. Still, they remained behind bars. It wasn't until 2007, when an expert witness analyzed the case, that things began to unravel. In 2008, investigative journalist Mara Leverett's book, Devil's Knot: The True Story of the West Memphis Three, revealed just how deeply flawed the investigation had been. It highlighted the lack of real evidence, the coercion of Jesse Misskelley, and the town's overwhelming desire to find a scapegoat. With growing support from the public and the backing of high-profile figures like Johnny Depp and Pearl Jam's Eddie Vedder, the West Memphis Three had gained a movement behind them. In 2008, the case took another shocking turn. New DNA testing on the evidence collected at the crime scene showed that it didn't match the West Memphis Three. This was the breakthrough that lawyers and supporters had been waiting for. Public pressure mounted, and more people began to question why these 3 men were still behind bars. With no physical evidence and no clear motive, how could they still be held responsible? Then came 2011. After years of legal battles and public outcry, the West Memphis Three were finally freed. But their release was not as simple as an exoneration. They had to plead guilty under an Alford plea, a legal maneuver that allowed them to maintain their innocence while still being convicted. It was a bittersweet moment, as their freedom was hard-won, but the stain of their wrongful conviction would never fully be erased. After being released, the West Memphis Three had to rebuild their lives. Damien Echols, who had spent 18 years on death row, became the most vocal in his quest for justice. Jason Baldwin and Jesse Misskelley were also left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Their story didn't end with their release. It became a symbol of the flaws in the criminal justice system. They became advocates for criminal justice reform, calling attention to the many others still wrongfully convicted and languishing in prison. In 2013, the HBO documentary West of Memphis, produced by Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh, chronicled told their story in detail, exposing the many layers of injustice that had surrounded the case. The documentary further fueled public interest in the case and contributed to the growing demand for criminal justice reform. The West Memphis 3 case remains one of the most significant and tragic stories of wrongful convictions in recent history. It's a case that raises important questions. How could the justice system fail so badly? How could 3 innocent teenagers spend so many years behind bars without a fair trial? The case of Damien, Jason, and Jesse is a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of DNA evidence, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Their fight for justice didn't just change their lives, it changed the way many people think about the criminal justice system. The story of the West Memphis 3 is a reminder that sometimes the truth takes years to emerge, but when it does, it's worth the fight. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of one of the most controversial cases in criminal history. If you want more true crime stories, wrongful convictions, and investigations that shook the world, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue to seek out the truth together.